Today, we'll be having a look at character advancement in Star Trek Adventures. Specifically, the Milestone system, which occupies the same space as both levels and XP do in the sort of game that you may have begun the hobby playing. Before we go any further, let's first underline that in Star Trek Adventures, the main characters already begin play with a power level similar to the hyper-competent bridge officers on the television shows and films of the Star Trek canon. The game emulates what we see on the television shows. As main characters develop, a great deal of their development is lateral, as we see different sides of the character, or the character grows by adjusting to new circumstances and direction as the season arcs progress. And so is the case in Star Trek Adventures, for the most part. This is a facet of the system that I've seen criticized. People will say that the game doesn't provide a juicy enough carrot of advancement to keep players engaged and hustling to reach that next level up. For my part, I think that the bones of the system are just fine, and that the scope of expansion of capabilities is perfect for Star Trek, and I think that there is a lot of space for advancement between a starting crew and the one that's played 50 or 60 sessions. At the end of this video, I hope to have shown a light on how much room for mechanical growth and growth in character prowess that there is in Star Trek Adventures, and I think it's more than just a little. However, the thing that I hear most often about Milestones and Reputation is that they're a bit difficult to get the gist of from reading the book, and just generally questions about what's going on with this or that within the mechanics. So first on our agenda, I'll just start by explaining the mechanics. But before we go deeper, some introductions. I am the Complex Games apologist, occasionally known as Antoine Lavoisier, or the French chemist. In ordinary life, my name is Jay. A big thank you to everyone who has subscribed and signal boosted all the videos on the channel. At some point, I really ought to give more thought to properly setting up a Patreon page. Suffice it to say, I wouldn't be here now having brought the content up to this level of awesome if it hadn't been for the help of such staunch early adopters. Cheers, everyone! So, getting back into milestones and advancement in Star Trek Adventures. This video will be focusing particularly on milestones, and we'll save reputation for a future video. Something that I think is more of a narrative tool that can inform storytelling and inform character progress and how you might spend the milestones that you're getting in this mechanic. So this video is going to be a little bit different than some of the other videos on the channel where we explain Star Trek Adventures, because I'm going to interject occasionally with some places where I think it would be beneficial to play the mechanics slightly differently than as written. Of course, with an explanation each time I think that's the case, and of course clearly laying out what the rules say in the book versus what I think might be a little bit more ergonomic. The reason I'm setting it up this way is because of a vital dimension to this topic, the fourth dimension, time.
Time is an illusion.
Past, present, and future. They exist as one.
And yesterday just may be tomorrow.
Like in every other RPG, the currency of advancement comes out a session at a time. So if using the mechanic in one way a session at a time, you can get a bit stuck with how you've already done it before you can change it. So I think it pays to think ahead. So the very Cliff's Notes version of Milestones goes like this. Main characters receive milestones, as opposed to supporting characters, at the end of missions. After every mission, every main character that appeared meaningfully during the mission receive what's called a normal milestone. You can use these right away to make some minor tweaks to your character, which have a pretty major effect on the character's power level in play, and also help you get the character feeling more like the fella or lady or being that's in your head or playing out on camera. By tuning the character's values and rephrasing them, your values can be easier to call on when spending determination, easier to challenge to gain determination, and most especially easier to propose value complications to earn determination without crossing those values out. So, as you, the player, master the system, how values and determination work, you can refine your character's values, making them more powerful and more authentic to the character concept, and you can respond to the campaign's influences on those values. The same goes for focuses. You might learn that EPS power systems as an area of focus is turning out to be hard to invoke for tasks in your campaign, and so you tune that up into dilithium chamber architecture. You might make a focus more specific from a general one as you learn the themes of the current arc of the campaign, swapping out genobiology for Klingon anatomy. you will get more normal advancements on your character than any other kind of advancement. So you can change something for the short term, and you'll more than likely have occasion to change it back or further evolve it with a future normal milestone. The gatekeeper to achieve a normal milestone is very easy. It's a low bar. I'll put the requirements to actually get one by the rules on the screen, but generally, if you know ahead of time as a player what those requirements are, those bars are very easy to meet. Why is that bar there? Well, my reading is that the qualifiers for normal milestones are there to check if you as the player were playing your main character, or perhaps the episode turned in an interesting direction and you spent the overwhelming portion of your time playing a supporting character. Supporting characters advance by a different mechanic, which revolves around how many missions the character has been activated on. So my reading of normal milestone gatekeeping is that there's a bar that asks if a player has spent much time as their main character, or if they perhaps activated 5 different supporting characters. Well, then that does a lot to advance the supporting crew cast. Normal milestones don't interact with the rest of advancement. Once you use or save them, the cumulative number of normal milestones you've received doesn't affect the other kinds of milestones. If you bank a normal milestone, it turns into a memory of the lessons you learned on this mission, and the character can call back to those lessons, spending the saved milestone as if it were a point of determination. So instead of calling on a value, you would call on the wisdom or lesson that you learned on the past mission and cross out that saved milestone. So remember to write down a bit of the mission that got that banked milestone, a bit of the memories, so that it will be available for later. Next are spotlight milestones. By the book, the GM designates some, but not necessarily all missions as spotlight milestones. The book says every 2 or 3 missions is reasonable, and then, on a spotlight mission, the players vote by secret ballot which main character, but not their own main character, will receive 1 spotlight milestone instead of a normal milestone. This is one place where I feel the rules as written will create a pace of advancement that will be surprisingly slow in hindsight. The first reason this will be slow is because while spotlight milestones are a big deal, they still only move things around on the character, rearranging rather than introducing new mechanical progress. It's the accumulation of spotlights that then leads to the earning of arc milestones, and that's where the real gravy is. So every 2 or 3 missions, only 1 character will get a spotlight. When we get to arc milestones, I'll lay out what that means to the pace. Suffice it to say for now, the players will probably naturally connive their votes so that at least 1 person will reach an arc milestone, and I imagine a situation where the players decide that each of them will wait their turn. Or maybe the players will decide that they all need to reach the cusp of an arc milestone before anyone can go over the edge. The point is that I think that there's a lot of moral hazard to this vote, and so the intention for the players to pick who the spotlight shone on is maybe not going to be fulfilled, because after all, there's not a lot of discussion around secret ballots, and so it'll be difficult to not compromise your own thinking towards strategic or tactical voting. So for my part, I would strongly encourage that you consider changing some of this. If you're playing on a weekly basis, which typically actually means that you're playing about 3 times a month during your best months, then provided that your sessions match up with missions in a 1-to-1 manner, then that means that in a game with 4 players, it will take between 5.5 and 8 months for everyone to reach an arc milestone if the group votes in an optimal way to get everyone to an arc milestone in the minimum time possible. And that's with 4 main characters. It will be even slower if there are more. So the questions to ask yourself here are, when you're contemplating adjusting this, I think are, in my more conservative or pessimistic imaginings, how long of a campaign do I envision this being? And how important is it that some amount of main character mechanical growth be a part of this campaign? For me, I would restrict the question to the very simple, do I want to make sure the main characters grow mechanically at least once before the campaign goes on hiatus or the group splits up because of IRL reasons, like new babies or job changes, graduation, moving out of state, or deployment. When answering that question, I think it's important to have a satellite qualifier that whichever mechanical advancement happens, those advancements will get to see some time in actual play too. It's nice to level up just as everyone parts ways, but it's far nicer to savor the fruits of one's labors for a while without immediately asking for a takeout box. So, if the answer is yes, it is important, then I think you should adjust the frequency of spotlight milestones upward. I've suggested keeping this question of advancement to a single quantum in scope, just one arc milestone, because there's a great deal of growth to be had in the campaign and growing into the game as a player in Star Trek Adventures. I think a lot of advancement naturally will happen in the story of the ship, and in players gaining more system mastery. The players will get better at using the tools that they have in the game, and the players will learn more about how to use their characters to strong effect, and synergize with the other players' characters. So how can you adjust the spotlight milestone drop rate? Well, the first thing you can do is make every mission a spotlight milestone. My experience of Star Trek canon is whispering in my ear that we learned something personal or saw a heretofore unseen well of strength in at least one character in every episode of Star Trek. The second thing you can do is drop more than one spotlight at a time. This, of course, doesn't play well with the group vote part of the mechanic. That's what I did for our campaign. At the end of every mission, I would name one or more characters that clearly had been in the spotlight and say, Asimov and Dr. Took earned a spotlight milestone, etc. You, of course, will need to do a little bit more natural spotlight management to see to it that each of the main characters gets their day in the sun, but days in the sun are now something that can be shared by more than one main character. So here's what you can do with a spotlight milestone. I'll leave that to hang a moment on the screen. Just using spotlight milestones, you can make some pretty big changes. One thing that we saw was a more athletic and more sexually charismatic side to Jean-Luc in seasons 5, 6, and 7. We saw his passion for archaeology. He learned the Resican flute and shot a crossbow. By moving some points into his presence, fitness, security, and science, this kind of a shift in a character can be represented mechanically by spending spotlight milestones. When you get a spotlight milestone, a normal milestone is also included, which you can spend to take normal milestone changes, or you can bank it to be used like determination. One thing that we haven't treated with yet is, according to the rules, characters earn milestones at the end of every mission. This term mission is a little bit loosey-goosey in the rulebook, and it's never defined in a hard and fast way, and sometimes the text of the rulebook uses it interchangeably with session. And in my own mind and my own recollection of the rules, for quite a while I'd conflated mission with episode, because I had really dove in headfirst for structuring my campaign in little, complete blocks of time, like episodes of the TV show. Not every campaign is going to be structured in the same way, both in terms of plot or story, format, transcript. If your campaign is more slice of life and follows a ship a day at a time, or on a hex crawl across space, or mirrors more modern TV where the episodes bleed one into the next, and it's more of a whole season of connected action, then going by mission is going to be hard to translate. Likewise, some groups are going to meet for less than the traditional 3.5 to 4 hours of session of face-to-face gaming. If you're playing online after the kids go to bed on weeknights, like I do, if you're meeting after class or in the pub, you may only be gaming for an hour and a half to 2.5 hours at a time, so that even if the campaign is broken into episodic missions like the classic television shows, the milestones will be coming slower than once per session, if you read it that way. At some point in the future, I'd like to do a separate video about defining the loosey-goosey word of mission for your own group's tastes and for your campaign as you relate to the rules. But for now, I'll say that one spotlight for every block of 8 to 12 hours of gameplay is what the book seems to suggest. And as I mentioned, I think that moving that number upward to 2 or more milestones for every 4 hours will probably suit most tastes. As for normal milestones, we do a lot of reflecting about our experiences in the role-playing hobby away from the table. And normal milestones allow a player to tune up and switch out their focuses and values as they see the character playing within the campaign. I think that the normal milestone qualifiers can be asked essentially of every main character after every session without breaking the game. If you play shorter sessions, sometimes you'll end up playing a supporting character for most of those sessions. And that way, the normal milestone mechanic is self-correcting. It will only let you go so much faster. So with that sidetrack of the ambiguous definition of mission out of the way, let's look at the top of the pyramid, the arc milestone. A beginning character's second spotlight milestone is instead an arc milestone, which then also includes a spotlight, which then itself also includes a normal milestone. As in, each higher class of milestone inside of its circle includes the smaller circles of each of the smaller milestones. After a character has achieved one arc milestone, their third spotlight after that will be an arc milestone. And then the 9th spotlight of their career will instead be an arc milestone, and then the 14th, and so on. Each and every arc milestone makes a big impact on a character's capability relative to a starting character. A player can choose to push a supporting character into an elevated capability, or improve the ship's systems beyond the stock value. The impact is big, and my impression of arc milestones when compared to what we see on the shows is that most of the TNG characters saw only 2 or 3 arc milestones across their tenure, and Jean-Luc, Will, and Data perhaps achieved 5 at most in a 7-season TV show. So apart from Spotlight Milestone's drop rate, which will require some tuning for your group, I think the system is just fine. First, because there's a great deal of growing into the ship, growing into relationships with the other characters, both as dyads and as a group, growing into the time period of Star Trek, and growing into the unique themes that your campaign will visit as it boldly goes. Second, because there's a great deal of growing into the 2x20 system and learning its ins and outs. There's your first starship combat and your first personal combat, your first clever use of the transporter or holodeck, and then there are your later, more practiced and precise uses of the tools before you. Finally, that meaningful leap between seeing the different sides of a character show through, almost like the writers are sounding out the character and developing that character, the threads of the stories, and then they culminate in that leap into a new level of capability in the form of an arc milestone. Even though the effect is somewhat modest, that big step, every once in a while, mirrors the way that we saw the characters grow on the shows. Jonathan Archer grows from bumbling between different approaches to exploration into a confident and centered peacemaker. Data evolves from a mechanical man into a knight-errant tilting at becoming human, and then into an understanding of his strengths and differences. 7 of 9 rediscovers her human courtesy and feels kinship with other artificial life. It doesn't happen suddenly, and it takes seasons to get there. You'll never cast 9th level god spells in Star Trek Adventures, but you begin play as someone confident and capable of standing watch on the bridge of a Federation starship. Starfleet already trusts your character to represent their ideals. The challenge, then, becomes to better know thyself.